Okay, I think I am set up on here. Well, good evening, everybody. It's another one of those topics that I was kind of nervous about. To be honest, I'm not super comfortable. I wanted to start this out by saying I probably should have put Tucker Carlson's name in the title. Um, One thing that I really struggle with is being a registered Republican. Um, I've been a Democrat for the majority of my political life. Um, how to put this? So, and it was one of those things where I chose to be a Democrat because I believed in ideologies. Now, this was like back in the day, um, where I would argue that Democrats were like sensible. Um, Now it's so like extreme, right? The Democratic Party is so extreme. But back when you can dare be moderate, I was a Democrat or whatever. So, and your views. And so, one thing that people love to say is that Republicans are, they use the racist word with the R on it. I don't know. I don't want to get into any trouble with YouTube with their uh, guidelines on what you can and cannot say. But at any rate, what I'm starting to realize as a Republican is that there's no real mm, dislike for certain groups because of like the color of their skin or whatever. It's the representation and the cultural insensitivity. One second, I think my baby up, y'all. I'm about to go grab her. So, sorry about that. I think my mic is working. So, here's the deal. When you think of like the brand of the Republican Party, you think, you know, the majority, which is like heterosexual, white Christian, male, traditional values, things like that come to mind. Straighten this up a little bit. And cool, whatever. I'm more aligned with that than I am like what the Democratic Party represents right now. Like the Democratic Party, in my opinion, is extremely xenophobic. They are just so radical with everything, right? Too radical to where people like me, we kind of had no choice. We got pushed out. Just being regular working people who are raising a family is like taboo to the Democratic Party, and especially if you have a traditional family where, or even like a married, geez, don't be married, with the Democratic Party. Well, anyway, there was some talking points that Tucker Carlson had, and I kind of didn't want to talk about this a little bit. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I really, really tried to just let this go. Shout out the lead quarter trucker. I really tried to let this go. Like I really just tried to take this speech for the sound bites and the clippings that I saw come across my news feed, as well as whatever was reported on the news. But this is going to be in so many different layers. This is Tucker Carlson, uh, pretty much talking about his attitude towards the Jeffrey Epstein files, and you know, just how people are being treated about this whole thing. Everybody wants answers, and I know I've been covering this for quite a few days, but I was really hoping that somebody else would bring this up instead of me. I didn't want to be the one to say it, but this is the clip I wanted you guys to listen to.
Should trust the government and whatever the bureaucrats tell us. And by the way, it's wrong to ask a lot of unauthorized questions. So
Let me go back even further than that because I really wanted him to set the stage on this. And I have to respect Tucker Carlson. Shout out to him. I respect his journalism and everything. But he says a few things that kind of hit some points here. So I'm gonna hit play on this again. I wanted to clip it up here.
So I noticed everyone's been talking about Epstein tonight, and I want to kind of differ from the crowd a little bit in saying that. I watched Ben Shapiro yesterday, and now before you boo me, I thought he made a really solid point. He's like, it happened a long time ago. Who cares? And by the way, we should trust the government and whatever the bureaucrats tell us. And by the way, it's wrong to ask a lot of unauthorized questions. So I just want to go on the record to say that, no, to say I think that's absurd. And it's exactly the kind of thinking that I personally voted against in the last election. In the last election, I spent a lot of the month of October campaigning with and for the president. I voted for the president. I never vote for anybody generally. I know they're always telling you, you must vote or you can't have an opinion. Oh, shut up. I don't like to vote, but I did vote this time. And I don't like to vote because I don't believe in any of them. And this time I really felt like I know Trump well. I love Trump personally. And what we were looking at was just so awful and totalitarian and stupid.
Now, I will say these sentiments that he has, and I hate to, no, I don't hate to. Let's put it this way. It's very difficult for me to express this without politicizing too much. Well, it is a political live stream, but what I'm getting at is let me go back to me. You know, growing up, talking about politics, most black people are taught that, if you're black, you're a Democrat. If you care about the poor, you're a Democrat. And even if you don't share those values, just as a black person, you're supposed to be a Democrat. And the black community is very vicious when it comes to people not caring for democratic ideologies in general, right? Or not even being registered as Democrat. Like, I have family and friends that, I we don't even talk. I mean, it was like overnight, like, uh, because I felt like Trump should have gotten a second term, like, no question. And a lot of people from my demographic had a problem with that. And I have friends like from like high school, like people from like middle and high school, we don't even speak because I voted for Trump, right? And it was mainly because you know the I felt like the way that blue states and blue territories were handling the pandemic was so bad, and there were so many questions that weren't answered. And in my opinion, I felt like people's right to their own bodies were being violated with the jab. You can't even talk about the mandatory I guess vaccinations. I'm trying not to again, like, even how I'm tiptoeing around with my speech. Censorship became a major thing during the Biden administration, and especially during the pandemic. And it's like this country will never be the same again, right? And I did not want the country to continue to regress into this bad state that we were in. So I just felt like, it wasn't even a question of picking the lesser of two evils at this point. It was really just a matter of, do you want a country anymore? And as hyperbolic as that sounds, when you have a country with no borders and you have people losing their jobs, locked in their homes, forced to take medication that was barely tested. It was like it was experimented. People were getting experimented on. People are still being affected by the side effects. OMG, this stream, I hope nothing happens to it. But I think the straw that truly broke the camel's back for me was when the Democratic Party basically selected Kamala Harris for us. There was no process of vetting to where we could choose. Like no Democrat ran against Biden. And I was like, that's as un-American as it comes. You know, just I just couldn't get over it. Like I'm in a loss for words even now speaking about it. But here's the problem. This is where we're gonna go to the problem with the Republican Party. Like starting out, okay, typical cheesy, white guy humor or whatever. It's cool. Like that's the main demographic of the Republican Party. One thing I do like about the Democratic Party is that since it's so diverse, you have different people just kind of sharing ideas, and they're very in touch. They're very in touch, in sync, and in tune with each other. I feel like the Republican Party, like I'm Republican for my money, and I'm Republican for my uh, traditional values, and that means more to me than being more diverse, if that makes any sense. Like DEI and LGBTQ parades and LGBTQ in the schools, completely unacceptable in my opinion. And there may be people who have a difference of opinion than me, but another main thing about the Democratic Party is if you have a difference of opinion, that's a problem even, right? So, you kind of as a lifelong Democrat up until um, the recent election, well, really not even the recent election, um, the 2020 election. Um, it was so many sketchy things going on, and I just felt like um, with Biden suddenly winning the way that he did, with everything being shut down, there's so many questions there. And then this last election, where they pretty much just slapped a bunch of felonies on the Trump. I'm like, well, this is crazy, right? Handed us Kamala Harris, telling us that she's black. She's clearly not black. And it's like, even if I have an opinion, it's a problem, right? But then you have the other side. And it just kind of, this side over here, the Republican Party, the grass is a little greener, but there's plenty of manure to keep it that way over here. It's like, just let him say it.
And it wasn't even the arguments that I disagreed with from the Kamala Harris. It's weird to even say her name now. Who was that exactly? It was like a bad dream. But it wasn't even so much the arguments I disagreed with, though I definitely disagreed with the arguments. It was the style of argument that drove me completely bonkers, summarized most crisply by "shut up, racist." Whatever you said, it was "shut up, racist." And it's like, but wait, first of all, I'm not a racist, but that's not even the point. The point is, I just told you what I think. I just asked you an entirely legitimate question, mostly, what the hell are you doing? And rather than answer it, you didn't pay me the respect that you would a human being. You treated me like a slave or an animal by telling.
This the part that got me. This the part that gets me about the Republican Party. This the thing about Republicans that this is why they lose their audience a lot. I think a lot of young people, and even specifically Black people, mind you, descendants of slaves, I think that these two groups would love to champion the Republican Party with no question if they weren't so tone deaf. He starts off by saying, every time I ask a question, they say, shut up, racist. But then you turn around and be like, you need to answer my question because I'm not a slave. And it's like, you know, even switching to Republican and, being in Republican circles and things like that, a lot of times with Republicans, they would reference slavery. They'd always have this thing where they have to talk about slavery happening a long time ago, whatever. They always make it that point, oh, I have a friend that's Black or whatever. And I'm like, what is the Republican Party's obsession with slavery, right? Like this whole, you can't treat me this way, I'm not a slave. And it's like, it just feels weird to hear it as a Black person because it's like, even in that context, shut up, racist. Oh, you can't treat me like that because I'm not a slave. And it's like, okay, for those of us who are descendants of slaves, this comes off in a very rub you the wrong way. And this is why I titled this video, How the Republicans Had I called it the hero wake up call. And I didn't want to say the actual word because I didn't want to get flagged because, YouTube's very sensitive. And I'm not really that familiar with the guidelines yet. I'm not trying to get into no trouble. But at any rate, I'm going to just call it the hero wake up call because everything that he's so outraged about, Black people have dealt with that and still are dealing with it. If you have an opinion, shut up. You're weird. You're wrong. It's always you get shut down. You don't know what you're talking about. You got to think the way other people want you to think. You got to look out for everybody else. You got to be understanding of everybody else. And even when, slavery is brought up in such a playful context, it's like, I know there are a lot of Black people that don't know their lineage. But one thing that really gets under my skin in conversation is when people say, oh, slavery happened a long time ago. My great grandparents were barely free. They were born on the same slave plantations that owned my great great grandparents. That's not that far removed. And so, I know there are a lot of Black people that get agitated when, something goes wrong and the first thing they want to say is because of slavery. I'm not doing that at all. I don't agree with that trope, not even a little bit. But what my point is that slavery is still a very fresh thing. It is not something that happened a long time ago. It is not something that, that we should just keep it moving and this never happened. It's just, I guess it's so woven into the fabric of American culture so much that it has to be mentioned, that it can't be something that you could just, never reference. And I'm just sitting here in my mind like, as a Republican now, the word slave and slavery, they have an effect on me. And they have an effect on all Black people, particularly hashtag FBA, Black people who have their lineage that they trace here in the United States. It's not, I guess it's something that you could throw around if you can't relate to it, or if it has nothing to do with you, or if you're in a room where you feel extremely comfortable, where you could say, you can't talk to me like that. I'm not a slave. And it's like, dude, it's 2025. That context, this is what really kills me about Republicans. It's like, dude, they don't call you racist because you say you don't like Black people. They call you racist because you are so out of touch socially. What you're implying when you say, I am not a slave or an animal, it is to say that a slave is interchangeable with an animal. And you must remember that there are people in this country who have close family members who've been treated like slaves and animals. Now, I don't think that Tucker Carlson is racist. I don't. Like I said before, he's one of my heroes. He's he's one of the main reasons why I am a registered Republican. And I even shared a sentiment with him when he was talking about how he didn't want to vote because he didn't, he doesn't respect any of these politicians or whatever. I am 100% with him all day long. And I was actually surprised at his lax attitude about voting, given that he's been a journalist and a commentator on Fox News. I just assumed all those folks voted, right? So I learned something new from him. But this is the thing that I know a lot of people have been talking about this from the perspective of, Tucker Carlson is turning on MAGA, or he's one of the voices that's helping MAGA turn against Trump. One thing that I love about what the Republican Party is becoming because of people like me is that I can hear certain things that a lot of these typical white Christian heterosexual married with kids males can't hear. The Tucker Carlsons, the Sean Hannitys, the what's my other favorite one? Oh my God, the one with the beard. Oh my God, Matt Walsh. The things that they can hear, even Candace Owens. She's not a white male, but she's married to one, close enough. I guess I just threw Candace Owens in there because sometimes she does tend to attack Black Americans quite a bit, and she's considered, she doesn't see herself as a Black American. She's a Caribbean or whatever. That's a whole other live stream. One thing I learned from my live getting cut off last night is I have too many subjects at one time, and it might just crash the live. But anyway, my point in bringing up all these right wing talking heads is that I am a, I don't think I'm a right winger, but I am a Republican and I am a conservative, proudly. Um, and it is sad because the Democratic Party gave me no choice. This is not something that I want it to be. You think I want to be on a screen with Tucker Carlson? I do not. But if I have to choose between a man in drag reading to my kids or my kids just going to school with people that don't really feel comfortable with them because they're probably a thug, you gotta, like, being Black, it's like you gotta pick. You gotta pick which evil do you want? Do you want liberals to be like, oh my God, hon, you poor thing? Or do you want conservatives to be like, if you're gonna be here, you can't do drugs. It's like you gotta pick. You gotta pick. And it's we're not okay. A lot of people have an issue with hashtag FBA, Foundational Black Americans. A lot of people have a problem with that. But the thing that I respect so much about that group is that it, of course, it's a whole delineation from other Black groups, right? So it's to talk about Black people here in the United States, from the United States, who have their lineage in the United States, these type of things. And what I love so much about that group is that we did not come here for a better life. We were forced to build a better life for others. And so when we have this dilemma of listening to people say things like, I'm not an animal or a slave, it's like we're in this weird place. It's not like we came here, like, take for example, I love Irish folk. This is something that I learned. Me and Irish folk are real, real cool. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the thing about okay, as a black person in America, anybody white is just like they're just white and you're black, and that's as far as it goes. Like they don't teach you nothing, they don't tell you nothing, right? So you just think all white people are all white people, and then black people are just black people. But then what I'm starting to realize, like, because I live in a predominantly white town, and I'm learning that there are different types of white people. Like, okay, it's different types of black people. For example, you have black people from the United States, you have black people from the Caribbean, you have black people from like various parts of Africa, and they have different ways and different, cultural vibes and stuff. Same with white people though, right? So, you know, and while I'm talking about the Irish, a lot of times the Irish talks about how they were out working in the fields along with the black people as indentured servants. But again, the Irish were indentured servants. Like they still had their human identity. Nobody's going, I'm not Irish or an animal. You need to respect me. Nobody's saying that, you know. So I just think these were some valid points, but I'm gonna let him continue to talk how he talks. And again, I do not think that he intends to be racist at all. And I did wait. I waited and I watched. I'm telling you, you guys, I love YouTube. Like I'm on YouTube all the time. I was hoping somebody would point this part out. Even when I went through news clips, I even attempted to not get on Tucker Carlson's page at all because I respect the man so much. But I just feel like this has so many layers in it. This Epstein situation just really opened up a can of worms here.
Telling me to stop barking, shut up, racist. And I won't put up with that because I'm not a slave or an animal. I'm an American citizen, an adult man who pays his taxes. So,
Is there a difference between a slave and an adult man in this country? Because you do know that there are slaves in other countries. And just because you're a slave doesn't mean your humanity is revoked. I think I'm starting to see why people call Republicans racist. He's not being racist at all. He's not. The people who are like applauding and cheering, they're not being racist at all. They're not. But this rhetoric, there are people who truly believe that this Epstein situation is trampling on their rights as human beings. But I just really hate that their reference point always have to go back to slavery. I think that's something that maybe the Republican Party will grow out of eventually.
I ask people questions for a living, and very often I get answers that I don't care for, that I disagree with, that I think are stupid, but at least they're answers. At least the person responding is treating me like a human being with a soul created in the image of the Creator. He's paying me the respect that every human being is due. When you ask a direct question to someone in charge, you are due. That person is morally bound to give you an answer. He's not bound to agree with you, but he's bound to stop and answer your question. And the left never did that. They would dismiss you out of hand. You are not worth listening to. Be quiet. And that's, of course, where the impulse to censorship comes from. It comes from the belief that you don't deserve to speak because you're not fully human. They own you. And that's what I voted against above all. I voted against a million different things that I hated about the last administration. Their insane desire to start pointless wars around the world. Their total unwillingness to protect this country domestically, to protect the people who live here, to protect the territorial integrity of the country, bringing in tens of millions of people illegally, giving them free stuff the second they get here, making a mockery of citizenship. I hated all of that. I hated all of that. But the thing I hated most was their total unwillingness to answer any question about why they were doing what they were doing, because it was just too insulting. And every single time I would just feel like raising the middle finger and screaming obscenities, which is not an adult response, I'll concede, but that's how I felt. And I think that's really at the heart of why the Epstein thing is so distressing. I mean, the guy was some weird sex freak who was abusing girls. We knew that. But the fact that the US government, the one that I voted for, refused to take my question seriously and instead said, case closed, shut up, conspiracy theorist, was too much for me. And
Yeah. So something I kind of wanted to share real quick. I just felt like nobody ever truly pointed that out. And I just felt like, how could anybody miss that? Even when he talked about, hey, they don't own us. And it's like, I just think the Republican Party is just tone deaf. I don't really think they mean any harm. I think they're just super duper tone deaf. Let me look at this thing. Okay, good. Just making sure my daughter didn't turn that off because she did grab the mic. But like I said, I don't think he really meant any harm by it. I don't take any true offense by it. But that's something that hopefully, I hope the Republican Party would, well, it's gonna change inevitably. The next generation is coming up, and before you know it, Tucker Carlson will be old and gray. And people who think like him. And I do think the Republican Party is moving in a better direction than it did before. But this is another thing I wanted to bring up as well. Going back to the hero wake up call, the fact that he equated not being answered to being a slave, I think that's significant. And I think that's a big deal because it tells me that the majority in this country is now starting to feel the harsh reality that people in power don't feel like they owe them anything. And I feel as though they have never been respected, the majority. I feel like people who thought they could trust this government and people who thought this government had integrity and that their representatives actually represented their best interests, behind closed doors as well as in broad daylight. I think they're starting to realize that the government is a very separate entity from them. And this Epstein thing is showing them that they have no control. And for FBAs, for Black people who were brought here as slaves and forced to build a better life for everybody who come here, I'm not discounting everybody else. I'm just kind of, using his terminology, comparing himself to a slave. For those of us who were forced here for generations, had to work for free and be brutalized, and then there are other groups of people who come here when the getting is good. There are a lot of immigrants. There are even take people like Tucker Carlson himself. I'm pretty sure his family, and I could be wrong, but there are a lot of European people here whose family has not been here for very long. They haven't. A lot of them, they didn't migrate here in time to be slave masters. They didn't. And I don't even think the majority of whites back in the day were slave masters because you had to be rich to own slaves, right? The point that I'm getting at here is that I don't know when the majority ever thought that someone like Trump cared about them. Like, Trump's first term did not benefit the majority of poor people in this country. And it's not benefiting them now. And in fact, I would argue that this second Trump term is eating up the middle class quite a bit. Anybody that feels like at least I'm not a slave in this country is completely missing it. Completely missing it. And I think I'm starting to understand the significance of this Epstein thing. It's not, I don't even think it's so much about them trying to say that they have a moral reason for this. I think it's the fact that they told their government what to do. And as MAGA, they thought, we got our man in and we're going to get our way. And they're not getting their way. and they're throwing a tantrum. Even he said, it makes me want to, put up my middle finger. Okay, what's that gonna change? Nothing. They're still gonna do whatever they want to do anyway, right? So I don't know. The silver lining that I could get from this awful, awful thing is that I think that this country is starting to realize that we are all equally not important. I think that's what the Epstein files is showing. People like Tucker Carlson and people like Candace Owens, like, hey, like this government ran by the elites, they don't care about anybody. And you thought you had a leg up because you weren't a slave or an animal. You were sadly mistaken. Like, like, welcome to our world, right? It's like, but you've already. Here's the thing that kills me. Now I'm about to get off in a second here. My daughter is like pushing a computer, but I would argue that the majority of Americans have always been in hot water. It's just like even when I was growing up, like I went to a predominantly white middle and high school, and you know I lived on the rough side of town. I lived housing project or whatever, and the problems that the so-called white privileged kids had compared to mine, I would never want to go through what they were going through. Like they knew intimate details about their parents' marriage falling apart. A lot of them, they were on like Adderall and stuff like that. It was just crazy. And I felt so bad for like, my black colleagues, because they would think that just because the white students, they some of them they had cars, or their parents were married, or they lived in the suburbs, that they were doing a whole lot better than us. And I'm like, yo, like when you get in these advanced placement classes and when you're surrounded by these folks, they are going through a lot. They're in a lot of pain too. Like, and I'm not trying to minimize what black people go through in this country at all, but even where I live now, like, I live in a predominantly white neighborhood. Man, my white neighbors, man, they going through it. They go through stuff just like we go through stuff. And I think a lot of black people beat a dead horse with this whole, well, it's slavery. And I'm doing anything but that. I think COVID just really made it to where everybody is forced to realize that we are in a climate of haves and have-nots. And I think it was that before then, because like even going back to like my upbringing, every time I looked at how black people would say that white people are better off, when I see white people, all I saw was that they had more credit, they had more debt. Like, sure, they have more access to wealth and stuff, and the government seems to really back them. But they're just one paycheck away from having nothing. Now we already ain't got nothing, right? Um, and I'm gonna just be real. A lot of times when black people were in the hood and stuff like that, self-inflicted wounds. It was stuff. When you have kids at wedlock, or there was a lot of people who had kids as teenagers, things like that. Of course, your life is gonna be rough. Your life is gonna be horrible. You had a baby at 15. It had nothing to do with slavery, right? But I'm starting to see what this Epstein files thing represents. It represents the fact that people like Tucker Carlson thought he was somebody, thought he could question the United States government. And just like a slave or an animal, using his words, he got put in his place. This government does what it wants to do. And just because it didn't make you a slave, and he even touched on being less than human and being owned, just because they were not in chains doesn't mean that the government has not been treating them inhumanely. And I think this Epstein thing, I think that's what's teaching them that, hey, they don't care about you either, bro. I don't even think these people are truly outraged about these rich people doing awful things, because rich people do awful things all the time. They're rich. Nobody's there to hold them accountable. But just the fact that they get to tell you to shut up, just like they've told us to shut up. I'm starting to think that's the main problem. But anyway, I just had to share that with you guys because I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I let a whole week go by. I was like, you know what? I might be tripping, you know. But I was like, you know what? I've been feeling this way for 7 days straight. And I was like, if nobody says anything about it, I will. So this is basically me saying what I said. And I appreciate everybody who came through and everything. And as always, you guys, put my daughter to sleep. And I'll catch y'all on the next live. Haha, she almost snatched my microphone. All right, y'all, catch y'all on the next live. Okay. Let me turn the live off. I'll give you the